Malcolm Grant was pulled over for no reason, just a black man driving alone on an open road. Moments later, one officer opened his trunk without cause, while the other quietly slipped a small bag of white powder inside. Minutes after that, Malcolm was in handcuffs accused of drug possession. What they didn't know: he's the deputy director of the DEA, and he's about to turn their roadside trap into a federal reckoning. How do you fight a system that's used to getting away with everything? If that question matters to you, give this video a like, share your thoughts. And now let's hear the full story. They knew him back in D.C. as Deputy Director Malcolm Grant, a name that carried weight in federal law enforcement circles. A man who'd spent over 20 years taking down cartels, dismantling drug corridors, and standing face-to-face with some of the most dangerous people in the country. But out here in the dry breath of Arizona's high desert, he wasn't the badge. He wasn't the title. He was just Uncle Malcolm. He hadn't seen his sister in nearly 3 years, hadn't played catch with his nephew since the boy was in middle school. The job had a way of erasing time, of making birthdays and phone calls feel like luxuries. But for once, he was off the clock. No briefings, no encrypted messages, no black SUV waiting at the curb. Just a man in a black Dodge Charger, windows down, wind humming through, and Bill Withers on the radio. The highway stretched flat and wide, the kind of road where your thoughts had room to wander. His hands rested easy on the wheel. His mind, not quite. Because even in peace, Malcolm Grant knew how fast peace could be broken. It was the silence that did it. The kind that shifts suddenly, like a pressure drop in a room before a storm. He glanced at the rear view. Headlights, small at first, then growing. He didn't flinch, didn't reach for anything. Just tapped the cruise control to confirm he was going 63 in a 65. Nothing to explain why the patrol car behind him had picked up speed. Why it was riding his bumper now closer than it had any reason to be. A part of him, a quiet, practiced part, began tracking the situation without even thinking. Distance, positioning, passenger seat. Empty. Just one driver. No lights yet. No siren. But staying that close, it wasn't random. His grip on the wheel didn't tighten, but his spine did. He'd been down this road before, not this literal stretch of highway, but this exact moment. Black man. Alone. Driving a nice car. In a county that didn't know his name. Malcolm took a slow breath, let it out through his nose. He could hear one of his old field partners in the back of his mind. "Just let it roll off your back, Grant. You're not on the job out here." Maybe, but his instincts never took a vacation. Then came the lights. Red and blue flashing suddenly in his mirrors like a switch flipped. He eased the Charger to the side, gravel crunching beneath the tires. Car in park. Hands on the wheel. Open road in front of him. And behind trouble dressed in a uniform. This wasn't new, but it never got easier. He kept his eyes forward, watched the sun dip a little toward the west. Time slowed in that particular way it only does when you're waiting for someone to make the first move and hoping they don't make the wrong one. Then he saw the driver door of the patrol car open. Officer stepped out. White male. Tall, squared shoulders, too comfortable with his belt. Not in a rush. No siren meant no emergency. This stop was about something else. Another door opened, so it wasn't just one. Second officer, younger, leaner, more energy in his walk. That kind of twitchy body language Malcolm had seen too many times before. The type that liked confrontation a little too much. Both officers approached from opposite sides, textbook pin maneuver. One to distract the other to circle. Malcolm didn't move, didn't reach. Just rolled down his window halfway when the first officer arrived. Enough to speak, not enough for hands to come through. "Afternoon," Sir Malcolm said, his voice smooth, respectful, controlled. The older officer squinted at him, then at the interior of the car. "License and registration." No problem, Malcolm replied. He moved deliberately, slowly reaching for the glove box with 2 fingers. No sudden movements, no reason to be misread. As he handed over the documents, he glanced in the side mirror. The younger one wasn't looking at the license. He was already eyeing the trunk. Malcolm felt it. That shift in the air, that unspoken charge. Something wasn't right. The older cop nameplate said Dullard held his license longer than necessary. Read it out loud, intentionally mispronouncing. Dean, is it? Grant? Malcolm corrected quietly. Dullard gave a small nod to his partner, almost imperceptible. And that's when Malcolm knew. This wasn't a traffic stop. It was something else. He'd seen it before. Officers looking for a reason. Any reason. And if they couldn't find one, they created one. And in that moment, something inside him switched. Not fear, not even anger. Just readiness. He was no longer just a man on vacation. He was Malcolm Grant again. Sergeant Ray Dullard didn't bother with a greeting this time. He stepped in close to Malcolm's window like he already owned the situation. One hand rested lazily near his holster. The other gripped Malcolm's license. "You know why I pulled you over?" he asked, though it was clear he didn't care much for an answer. "No, sir," Malcolm replied calmly. Dullard leaned in just slightly like he was testing the air between them. "You were drifting lanes. Might be tired. Or maybe distracted." Malcolm didn't blink. "I was within the lines. Cruise control set at 63. Dullard's lips curled, not quite a smile, more like a smirk that had seen too much unchecked power. "Well, Dean, it's Grant," Grant Dullard repeated, making a show of correcting himself. "Step out of the vehicle for me." Malcolm hesitated just a second. It wasn't the request, it was the way it was delivered. There was no real pretense of concern, no safety check. This was about control, about dominance. He'd seen it before, but never this up close while out of uniform. He stepped out slowly, hands visible, posture open. Behind him, Officer Nate Coyle circled like a vulture around a calm body. Young, full of swagger, his mirrored shades hiding whatever his eyes might give away. But his mouth, that smirk, spoke volumes. "You traveling alone?" Nate asked, already knowing the answer. "I am. Heading where family visit. Tucson." Dullard cut in louder. "Mind popping the trunk?" Malcolm turned slightly. "Is there a specific reason for that, Sergeant?" And that right there was the shift. Dullard's face tightened, just enough to show irritation. He stepped in close. Too close. "Are you refusing a lawful order?" "No, sir. I'm asking on what legal grounds you're requesting access to my property." A beat of silence. The kind that carries weight. The kind that tells you everything you need to know about what's coming next. Nate snorted. "Probably nothing back there, right? Just groceries and goodwill." Dullard tilted his head. "We've got suspicion of narcotics based on vehicle behavior and refusal to comply." Malcolm sighed softly but deeply. He looked toward the horizon where the sun sat warm and bright, painting everything gold, like it still believed this country could be good. Then he nodded. Quiet, controlled. He popped the trunk. The sound was small, a mechanical click, but to Malcolm it echoed louder than it should have, like a vault being opened. Nate was already moving. He walked with a bounce that reeked of certainty, not caution. Malcolm didn't need to turn around to know what was happening. But he did. Slowly. And sure enough, not 2 minutes later, Nate held up a clear plastic bag. Inside a fine off-white powder. "Well, well," Nate said loud enough for the open highway to hear. "Not so clean after all, huh?" Dullard chuckled, shaking his head like a disappointed father. "That's a shame, Mr. Grant." Malcolm didn't move. Not a twitch, no outburst, no wild denial, just a long, slow breath. "That's not mine," he said flatly. Dullard's eyes narrowed. You expecting us to believe you drive across county lines with felony weight in your trunk, and you don't know how it got there? Malcolm turned toward him. I'm saying I didn't put it there, and you didn't find it. You planted it. Nate's smile twitched. That's a bold accusation. No, Malcolm said, voice steady. It's a fact. And that moment, that silence between them, wasn't fear. It wasn't panic. It was the beginning of something Dullard didn't quite recognize yet. A man who wasn't afraid of them. Hands behind your back, Dullard said, finally drawing the line. You're under arrest for possession of a controlled substance with intent to distribute. Malcolm didn't resist. He turned, offered his wrists. Click. Click. The cuffs locked around his skin, cool and familiar. He'd worn cuffs before. He'd placed them on others. He knew what they meant. But this time, they weren't a symbol of guilt. They were a countdown. Because Sergeant Dullard and Officer Coyle had no idea who they'd just put their hands on. They thought this was going to be a routine stop with a black man who couldn't fight back. What they didn't know was that this wasn't the beginning of Malcolm's downfall. It was the beginning of theirs. They didn't read him his rights. Didn't tell him what he was being charged with. Didn't even try to hide the contempt in their eyes. Malcolm asked calmly. I'd like to speak to an attorney. Ray Dullard leaned in with a crooked grin and said, You'll speak when I say you can. Then he yanked the car door open like he was unwrapping a threat. Before Malcolm could take a breath, he was dragged out of the vehicle. It wasn't an arrest. It was a public shaming. In the middle of that desert heat, his chest was slammed down onto the hood. The metal was blistering, burning into his forearms. His sunglasses fell. His hat rolled away. But Malcolm didn't resist. He stared at the asphalt, calm, controlled, like he'd trained for this, because he had. He heard the snap of cuffs behind him, and then a voice, low, smug, leaning in too close. Still think you're better than us, Nate whispered. You people always do. Malcolm closed his eyes, and in a voice so even it sliced the air, he replied, I know who I am, and soon you'll wish you hadn't asked. The officers looked at each other. For a brief second, they hesitated. There was something in Malcolm's tone, not fear, not arrogance, just certainty, and that made them uneasy. But ego doesn't stop when it's feeding. Ray shoved him upright, patting him down rough, too rough, like he wanted pain to do the talking. From across the road, a family in an SUV slowed down to watch. The father's eyes met Malcolm's, but the car kept rolling. That's the thing about being black in moments like this. You become a scene, not a person. Once in the back of the cruiser, doors slammed shut around him. Thick silence followed. Even the air conditioner seemed to hum in judgment. Malcolm sat straight. He didn't shout, didn't plead. He watched, measured. Ray glanced at him in the rear view. You know I've been doing this 22 years, he muttered. You can always tell the ones who think they're untouchable. Always so calm, like we're the ones out of line. Malcolm didn't blink, didn't give him the satisfaction. Nate chuckled. Some guys cry, some beg. You didn't. That's what makes it fun. Still, Malcolm said nothing, but the silence wasn't weakness. It was warning. They drove in that stale heat for 25 minutes, long enough for sweat to soak into Malcolm's shirt, long enough for memory to crawl in. He thought of Jonathan Ruiz, his partner at the agency, killed in a sting gone sideways in Tucson. A good man, a better friend. That's why Malcolm had taken the vacation. To breathe, to feel normal again. And now here he was, cuffed, silenced, degraded because two men couldn't imagine a black man behind the wheel without suspicion. When they reached the station, the doors flung open. Malcolm stepped out without being asked. He wasn't resisting, but he wasn't surrendering either. As they walked through the station lobby, a young officer at the desk glanced up. He was black, maybe 24, fresh out of the academy. His eyes widened slightly when he saw Malcolm in cuffs. Recognition flickered, but he said nothing, only gave the faintest nod. Malcolm returned it. Because sometimes dignity is shared in silence. They led him past holding cells, ignoring procedure, bypassing processing. No Miranda rights, no explanation, just steel cuffs and the suffocating certainty that none of this was an accident. Ray barked at a rookie to unlock interview room B. Before stepping inside, Malcolm took one last look over his shoulder. His voice was steady. "You better get this paperwork right." Ray scoffed. "You'll be lucky if anyone even picks up your phone call." And then the door closed behind him. But what Ray didn't know was that Malcolm wasn't the one who needed luck. Officer Daniel Rios had only been working at the department 6 months. Still fresh out of academy, still ironing his shirts at 5 a.m., still thinking rules meant something. He was in the processing room when they brought Malcolm in, cuffed, silent eyes, calm. There was something about the way the man carried himself. No fear, no flinch. Like he didn't belong in chains. Like he was letting this happen. Rios felt it. He reached for the intake form, typing Malcolm's name into the system. Nothing. He tried again. Full name, middle initial, still access denied. Strange. The system didn't usually block street arrests. He looked up. "Sir, do you have any other form of ID on you?" Malcolm said nothing, just looked him dead in the eye. Calm. Heavy. Like he was waiting. Rios hesitated, then typed the arrest report into the external federal database DEA, just to rule it out. The screen blinked. Then a box flashed red. Access restricted. Clearance required. Contact DEA Field Ops Director Code Phoenix Lock. Rios blinked. The cursor froze. He reached for the landline, the emergency line, the one marked, "For federal confirmation only." His hands were sweating now. He gave the code. There was a pause. Then a woman answered. Crisp. Direct. Name and badge number. He gave both. Then the line changed tone. Fingerprint or iris scan required. I can scan him here. Do it. He rolled the biometric scanner over Malcolm's thumb. The device chirped. The data transmitted. 3 seconds later, her voice returned sharp now. "Where is he, interview room B?" Her tone shifted from formal to alarmed. "You need to listen carefully. That man is Deputy Director Malcolm Grant of the DEA. He is on a protected clearance list. He is not to be detained. He is not to be searched. He is not to be questioned." Rios froze. "Where is the arresting officer?" Rios glanced toward the hallway. The camera light above the hallway door was off. They left. A few minutes ago. Through the south exit." There was silence. Then the voice said, "Shut the building down. Lock every exit. And do not let him walk out without federal coordination. Do you understand? Yes." "Yes, ma'am." She hung up. Rios stood there for a beat, heart pounding. He looked over at Malcolm. Malcolm hadn't moved. He had heard everything. And now, for the first time, he spoke. "Stand up," he said to Rios. "Walk with me." Rios obeyed. Malcolm stood tall, calm, cuffed no longer. He reached into the inside lining of his jacket. Rios instinctively tensed. But what came out wasn't a weapon. It was a worn black leather wallet unfolded with quiet weight. Inside, a federal badge gleamed. DEA, Deputy Director, Malcolm T. Grant. Malcolm tapped it once, then looked Rios in the eye. "Lock down your station, officer. Right now. This is now a federal crime scene." Rios stumbled back toward the main desk, grabbed the emergency override, and hit the lockdown sequence. Every door in the building sealed. Steel clanked into place. Alarms blinked red. Within seconds, confusion erupted in the bullpen. What's going on? Was that lockdown? Who hit the override? One sergeant stormed toward them. Lieutenant Warren Hobbs, mid-50s, built like a brick wall, and not used to being questioned. He spotted Malcolm and barked, "Who the hell are you to issue a lockdown in my station? Malcolm stepped forward. Deputy Director Grant, DEA. Your officers just planted narcotics on a federal agent and attempted an illegal arrest. They fled the building 10 minutes ago, disabling hallway surveillance as they exited. Hobbs scoffed. You expect me to believe that Malcolm didn't flinch? He pulled a USB drive from his pocket. This contains backup cloud footage from my body cam audio logs and time-synced GPS. You have two options, Lieutenant. One, you interfere and I report obstruction of a federal investigation. Two, you help me find them and keep your badge. The room fell still. For a moment, Hobbs looked like he might erupt. But then, something changed in his eyes. Fear, recognition. He stepped back. Officer Rios, he muttered. Do what he says. Rios looked between them, then back at Malcolm. Sir, what can I do? Malcolm gave him a nod. You already did it. And in that moment, Rios made his choice. Not just between two men, but between two sides of the law. The station was locked down tight. Outside, sirens wailed as backup arrived, not to protect the building, but to secure it for federal investigation. Inside, Malcolm's presence had shifted the air itself. Some officers avoided his gaze, others whispered behind closed doors. But Malcolm wasn't there for drama. He was there for facts. He pulled out his phone and tapped one number. Lane, I need you. Now. Marcus Lane was no stranger to chaos. He'd served under Malcolm for 6 years, first in covert field ops, then as a forensic analyst. And he didn't hesitate. 27 minutes later, he was standing inside Evidence Room A lab coat, half-buttoned laptop under one arm, eyes scanning the sealed bag containing the white powder pulled from Malcolm's trunk. Let me guess, he said, raising an eyebrow. They found this right after pulling you over for a busted taillight. Malcolm didn't even blink. No taillight. No cause. Lane slid on gloves, popped the bag into a scanner, and typed in his access code. Within seconds, a chemical signature appeared. Lane whistled. Bingo. This batch came from Ngalas, Liberia, 2022. Seized during Operation Silver Thorn. DEA custody only. Never made it to public court records. Malcolm nodded. So how did it end up in my car? Lane looked at him grimly. Either someone inside the DEA is leaking sealed evidence, or someone hacked our internal database. He glanced at Rios, who had been standing quietly in the corner listening. You still have access to the station's system. Rios nodded, then stepped forward. I've been noticing something strange, he said, pulling up a data stream on the nearby terminal. Every time someone files a report, it goes through the main archive. But about a month ago, some reports started rerouting, bouncing through an unregistered node first. He tapped the screen. A string of code appeared. Only one name tied to the reroutes, L. Voss. Malcolm's face darkened. He knew that name. But before he could explain, the sound of rapid footsteps echoed down the hallway. A woman in jeans, leather boots, and a press pass hanging loosely from her neck appeared. Leah Torres, investigative reporter, known for two things: exposing corruption and not asking permission. You're Grant, she asked. I am. I heard you locked down a precinct. You're not wasting time. Neither are you, he said. Leah pulled a tablet from her bag and slid it across the table. On it, a spreadsheet, names, dates, charges, officer IDs. 47 cases, she said. All minorities. All arrested by 2 or more officers in this precinct. All claimed drugs magically appeared. And in every single case, the body cam footage was either missing or corrupted. Malcolm's eyes moved slowly across the list. Some names he recognized, most he didn't. This one, she pointed. 16 years old. Juvie. Lost his scholarship. This one, another tap. Mother of 3. Fired from her job. And this? Malcolm asked, voice low. Leah nodded. He died in custody. Heart failure. His mom's still waiting for answers. Lane leaned forward. Every one of these cases had officers Nate Coyle or Ray Dullard involved. Leah nodded. Rios spoke up again. The name L. Voss, it doesn't match any badge IDs. but I dug into the admin files. It shows up as a back-end code assigned to system overrides, like shutting off hallway cameras, rerouting audio feeds. Malcolm turned to him steady. You saying someone built their own back door into the police system? Rios nodded. That's not just corruption, Lane muttered. That's architecture. Malcolm stood still for a long second. Then his voice dropped. This isn't just about me. It's about everyone who was erased. The room fell silent. The weight of it dropped on them all at once. Rios stepped forward again. Sir, what happens now? Malcolm glanced toward Leah. Now, we burn it down legally. He picked up the sealed drug bag, turned toward the secure locker, and signed it in as federal evidence. Then he looked at Lane. Secure the samples. Start a trace protocol on any narcotics signed out under sealed case clearance. Check for matching isotopes. He turned to Leah. Tell your editor the story just tripled in size. Then finally, he faced Rios. I need every log from the past 6 months. Audio, visual access codes. Everything El Voss touched. Rios nodded. And Malcolm, for the first time since his arrest, allowed a breath to release from his chest. The trap they'd tried to set for him had just collapsed. But now, he was walking into theirs. Only this time he was ready. The rain came down soft that afternoon, not a storm. Just a quiet drizzle, like the sky was trying to say something it couldn't put into words. Malcolm stood in front of a small house on the south side of town, paint-faded porch, sagging, but the roses out front were blooming like they didn't care. He knocked once. The door creaked open. She looked older than her years. Gray hair pulled back, eyes sunken but sharp. She held on to the edge of the door like it was the only thing steady in her world. You must be Malcolm Grant, she said. Yes, ma'am, he replied gently. I spoke with your pastor. She nodded, stepped aside and let him in. The house was quiet, no TV, no music, just the ticking of a wall clock and a faint smell of lemon cleaner. On the mantel sat a photo of a smiling young man, cap tilted, one hand doing a goofy peace sign. Elijah Brooks, 19. Bernice stood beside the fireplace, arms folded. They told me it was suicide, she said flatly. Malcolm didn't interrupt. They said he took his own belt, in a holding cell, after being picked up for suspicious behavior outside a store he went to every week. Her voice cracked. They didn't even let me see him at first. When they did, he looked like someone had tried to rearrange his face. Malcolm swallowed hard. He knew the file. He had read it last night. But files don't bleed. Mothers do. I'm sorry, he said, and he meant it in a way that reached beyond this moment. Bernice didn't answer. She walked to a small drawer, pulled out a worn flash drive, and handed it to him. Miss Torres gave me this. Said you should see it. Malcolm plugged it into his laptop. The screen lit up. Security cam footage. Grainy. Muted. 2 officers dragging Elijah down a hallway, Ray and Nate. No cuffs, just fists. They shoved him into a cell, closed the door. No cameras inside, but the shadows on the floor told a story. Flashing lights, sudden movements. Then, nothing. Then came the hallway again. Ray walked out alone. Malcolm closed the laptop slowly. They said there was no footage, Bernice whispered. That it got erased in a system update. He looked up at her. Her eyes were filled with something beyond pain. It was purpose. My boy was gentle, she said. Couldn't even watch boxing. Said it made his stomach hurt. She sat down across from him. I know I'm not the only one. I know there are other mothers, other fathers, people who buried their children because somebody wanted to play God. Malcolm nodded slowly. And I know something else, she added. If you're who they say you are, you ain't here just to feel sorry for me. No, ma'am, he said. She leaned in. Then make them remember his name. Just then, the front door creaked again. Daniel Rios stood at the threshold, soaked from the rain. He had followed Malcolm from the station, quietly, without asking. He didn't say anything at first, just looked at the woman, then at Malcolm, then at the photo on the mantel. "This the boy?" he asked. Malcolm nodded. Rios looked down. "I helped write that report," he said. "Didn't know what I was signing." Bernice didn't flinch. She just said, "Now you do." Rios stood silent for a long moment. Then, "Let me help fix it." Malcolm turned to Bernice. "You mind if he sees the footage?" She shook her head. As Rios watched the screen, his jaw tensed. His eyes stayed locked on the grainy figures, their movements, their violence, their arrogance. When the footage ended, he simply said, "We've got everything we need to bury them." But Malcolm looked at Bernice. "No," he said softly. "We're not burying them. We're exposing them." She nodded once. Tears rolled down her face. But this time she didn't break. Sometimes the biggest enemy isn't the man in front of you. It's the one who used to stand beside you. Malcolm was staring at the wall of the temporary ops room. He didn't blink, didn't shift, just let the names, the photos, the reports wash over him like cold water. Then Marcus Lane stepped in. He had that look, the kind that said he'd been digging through more than just files. "You need to see this," Marcus said quietly. He dropped a folder on the table. Red tab. Handwritten. Malcolm flipped it open. There, printed in faded ink, was the name Logan Voss. Malcolm exhaled. Long and slow. Like a memory he hadn't wanted to meet again. "You know him," Marcus said. "I used to," Malcolm replied. Flashback. 9 years ago. Desert heat. Blood on a warehouse floor. Malcolm gun drawn. Logan Voss beside him smiling like the world was a chessboard and he was always 3 moves ahead. Back then they were partners. Elite team. Deep cover ops. But even then Voss was a shadow too slick to hold. Malcolm had overlooked a lot until he couldn't. It was a raid in Juarez that broke the spell. Malcolm had found a sealed evidence crate, reopened samples missing, timelines, rewritten. Voss shrugged it off. "They won't miss it," he said. "We get results, remember." But Malcolm didn't come from the school of shortcuts. He reported it. Voss was dishonorably removed. DEA wiped his record clean quietly. No noise. Just gone. Or so they thought. Back in the present, Marcus tapped a screen. A blueprint came up. A software module, hidden deep inside old DEA archive systems. "Ghost Ledger," he said. "I thought it was a myth. But it's real." The tool didn't just falsify logs, it recycled evidence from closed cases, marked it as new, and flagged random suspects across different states. All the planted drugs, Marcus continued, came from previously sealed DEA lockers, same chemical markers, same dusting codes. "And Voss is behind it," Malcolm muttered. "Operating through rural precincts. No federal oversight." Marcus nodded, using them like testing grounds. Ghost towns for ghosts like him. Just then, Leah Torres entered, phone in hand. "I got something," she said, waving it like it was burning. "You're not gonna like it." She dropped a printout on the table. An encrypted message from a DEA internal account time-stamped just 10 minutes after Malcolm was pulled over. The message, "He's exposed. Move now. Discard chain." Leah folded her arms. "Someone inside sent a heads up to Voss. He knew you were vulnerable before you even stepped out of your car." Malcolm didn't say a word for a moment. Then, he was always 5 steps ahead, but not anymore. Leah looked up. "What are you gonna do?" He didn't hesitate. "I'm going to rip the whole thing down. Ledger Syndicate, every name on that signal thread. And Voss." He paused. "He was once my brother. Now he's the rot I have to cut." Outside, the sun was starting to dip behind the hills. Shadows stretched long. In the corner, Rios watched in silence. His jaw clenched. He wasn't sure what scared him more, the scale of the system they were about to challenge, or the calm in Malcolm's voice when he said he was ready. By the time the desert sun began to slip behind the hills, Silence had swallowed the stretch of dirt where a rusted trailer sat half buried in dust. Inside, Ray Dullard paced like a trapped animal, sweat running down his temples. Nate Coyle sat near the window, nervously peeling the label off a bottle of warm water. They had been hiding for days. No phones, no contact, just waiting. Someone had cleared their body cams. Someone had helped them disappear. But help doesn't mean safety. Not when the man you framed turns out to outrank the people protecting you. They didn't hear the first two vehicles pull up, but they heard the third, the one that braked with authority. A voice cut through the dry air. Step outside, hands where I can see them. Ray peered through the blinds and froze. Daniel Rios stood outside in full DEA tactical gear badge on his chest warrant in hand, but he wasn't the boy from the station anymore. He wasn't confused, wasn't unsure. He was focused, calm, like someone who had chosen exactly which line he would stand on. Ray muttered, "That little rookie, hell no." Behind Rios, more agents took position, silent, ready. And then he stepped forward. Malcolm Grant. No sunglasses, no tie, just a steady gaze that cut through time itself. Ray's mouth opened slightly as if he'd seen a ghost. Nate backed away from the window like he'd touched fire. Malcolm didn't shout. He didn't threaten. He just lifted a small object wrapped in DEA seal and tossed it to Rios. "Test it." Rios opened the bag. Inside a sample of the same isotope-laced powder they claimed to find in Malcolm's trunk. "Pulled straight from the ghost ledger," Malcolm said. "Tell me it doesn't match what they planted." Ray's face went pale. The agents closed in. Rios spoke clearly. "Raymond Dullard and Nathaniel Coyle, you are under arrest for evidence tampering, obstruction of justice, and conspiracy to defraud federal authority. You have the right to remain silent." Ray turned to Malcolm, voice tight. "You're not supposed to be here." Malcolm stepped closer, his voice low but sharp. "And you weren't supposed to abuse that badge. But here we are." They didn't resist. Not this time. Nate dropped to his knees, hands on his head like the weight of the truth had finally broken him. Ray held still, jaw clenched, eyes burning not with defiance, but with the bitter taste of being caught by the very man he tried to humiliate. As the agents cuffed them, Daniel caught Malcolm's eye. "I didn't know it'd feel like this." Malcolm raised a brow. Like what Daniel looked at the two men being led away. Like justice, actually, has weight. Malcolm didn't answer. He didn't have to. Instead, he glanced toward the horizon where the sun had just dipped below the ridge, casting long shadows behind them. Behind him, one of the agents approached with a handheld scanner. "Sir, isotope confirms match. Same compound, same batch marker." Malcolm nodded slowly. "Then we have what we need." But just as they were preparing to leave, a sharp tone rang out on Rios's secure line. He answered quickly, listening, then tensed. He looked to Malcolm. "Sir, there's movement. Voss may have been tipped off. His name just pinged off an encrypted channel." Malcolm's eyes narrowed. Ray and Nate might have been the face of the rot, but the root was still breathing. "Secure them," Malcolm said calmly, "and lock the station down." As the trailer was cleared and the cuffs clicked shut, the desert wind picked up whispering through the cracked walls like the ghosts of stories unfinished. Malcolm looked back at Ray one last time. "You made the wrong enemy, but this isn't about revenge. This is about every name you erased and every voice you silenced." Ray didn't respond. He couldn't. Because now justice had a voice, and it was louder than both of them. And Malcolm, he wasn't done. Because when they start talking, someone else is going to get nervous. The morning of the trial, the steps of the federal courthouse didn't look like a place for justice. They looked like the front lines of a war that had been boiling under the surface for too long. Dozens of cameras, hundreds of people, signs that read, "Justice for Elijah, fix the system," and one that simply said, "We see you now." At the front of it all stood Leah Torres. No mic, No makeup team. Just her phone, a calm voice, and one question broadcast to millions. Will America finally look justice in the eye? Inside the courtroom buzzed like a wire about to snap. Media outlets from coast to coast filled every bench. Families who'd lost loved ones to false arrests sat shoulder to shoulder, and in the third row a chair had been left empty, with a folded photo of Elijah Brooks taped to the back. When the judge entered, everyone stood. When Malcolm walked in, quiet, composed, no badge visible, the room didn't move. It breathed him in, like the eye of a storm. Ray Dullard sat hunched in his seat. His lawyer spoke for him. Nate wouldn't lift his head. But the silence broke when a name was called. Mrs. Bernice Brooks, please take the stand. She walked slowly, hands trembling, but when she turned to face the jury, there was something unshakable in her voice. I lost my son in that station. They told me he killed himself, that he just gave up. But Elijah didn't give up. Elijah was a fighter. He was kind. He was 19. She paused, breathing deep. He had asthma, you know. Real bad since he was a kid. When they choked him, they knew he couldn't breathe. And they still didn't stop. Not a single cough. Not a single whisper. Even the judge leaned back like her words had pushed the oxygen out of the room. Daniel Rios sat behind the railing, gripping the edge of his seat. His lips pressed tight, eyes red. Then he stood. Your Honor, he said quietly. Permission to speak. The judge hesitated, then nodded. Daniel turned toward the jury. I processed Elijah's arrest file. I didn't know what I was looking at then. I didn't ask the right questions. But after I saw the footage, after I met his mother, I knew. He glanced at Bernice, then back at the crowd. Elijah could have been my son. The room didn't erupt. It didn't gasp. It softened. In that moment, no one saw a uniform. They saw a man, a father, a human being holding the weight of complicity. Malcolm never spoke. He sat quietly, hands folded, eyes steady. He'd been through too much to need words now, because his presence alone was a message. For every name redacted, every record wiped, every mother who buried a child in silence. He was still standing. The jury deliberated for 5 hours, and when they returned there were no dramatic gestures. Just the truth. Raymond Dullard, guilty on all counts. Nathaniel Coyle, guilty on all counts. Logan Voss, guilty of conspiracy, obstruction, and federal subversion. The judge didn't waste time. Raymond Dullard and Nathaniel Coyle, you are hereby sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Ray flinched. Nate finally cried. Then the judge turned to the bailiff. Strip them of their service weapons and badges. Now. You could hear a pin drop. The officers stepped forward. The gold badge was yanked from Ray's chest, his holster removed, his belt unclipped. And there, on national television, the man who once dragged Malcolm across the hood of a car stood exposed. No title, no power, just a man who thought he could break another and walk away from it. Leah's camera zoomed in as Ray was led away. The live stream comment section exploded. Finally. That mother made me cry. We need more Daniels. What about Voss? The judge raised her voice once more. Logan Voss is hereby sentenced to 120 years under federal confinement at Supermax Florence ADX, effective immediately. That was when Logan stood face tight. You people don't understand the machine you're poking. But Malcolm, for the first time all day, rose to his feet. No, he said. You just didn't think the machine would ever turn on you. Gasps. Cameras clicked. And Voss, for all his power, looked small for the first time. When the court recessed, people didn't leave. They lingered. Outside, crowds sang, wept, hugged strangers they'd never met before. Justice didn't just echo that day. It thundered. And though Malcolm said little, every glance he gave told the country, this wasn't over. This wasn't just about him. This was the beginning of something bigger. Something that would reshape the way the system looked at itself. Because the courtroom may not have expected this, but the people had waited for it long enough. The trial was over. The cameras faded. And just like that, the noise began to settle. For most people, justice ends with a verdict. But for Malcolm Grant, it ended in a quiet room with a question and a choice. Washington called. The director of the DEA had resigned, citing a failure of oversight. The president's chief of staff offered Malcolm the role. A press conference was prepared. The stage was set. But Malcolm never showed. Instead, he stood in a quiet corridor outside a hospital in Phoenix, holding his nephew's hand. "I'd rather earn my nephew's trust," he said softly to the phone, "than your title." The line went dead. And for once, that silence felt like freedom. A week later, Bernice Brooks knocked gently on Malcolm's porch. She wore her Sunday dress and a solemn look. In her hands was a small velvet box. "I don't know what to do with this," she said, placing it on the table between them. It was Elijah's. Inside lay Elijah's junior police badge, bent slightly at the edge from when he dropped it as a child. Still polished, still proud. For everyone who had no one, Bernice said. Malcolm stared at it for a long time, then nodded. "I'll carry it right." Across the country, Leah Torres aired her final segment on the case. No music, no graphics, just a black screen fading into her voice. "Justice doesn't always scream," she said, "but it always remembers." She played the timeline, the arrest, the corruption, the trial, the truth. And she ended with Elijah's photo, smiling under a sunbeam, one hand raised to block the light. "No more shadows," her voice whispered. "Not this time." Malcolm didn't go back to Washington. He went back to the small adobe house, tucked just off the desert road where it all began. The porch creaked like it always had. The wind carried no orders, no suspicion, just the smell of wild sage and sun-warmed dust. That evening, as the light stretched long across the floorboards, his nephew came running out the back door barefoot with a painted rock in one hand and a scraped knee he didn't seem to notice. He stopped in front of Malcolm wide-eyed. "Did you win?" Malcolm didn't answer right away. He looked past the boy toward the horizon, toward the place where justice still had miles to walk. Then he smiled. "No," he said gently, "but I made it right." The boy didn't ask what that meant. He just reached out, wrapped his arms around Malcolm's waist and squeezed tight. And in that quiet embrace, the story finally exhaled. As the screen darkens, one final line fades in. This is fiction. But ask any black man and they'll tell you, this story isn't far from real. Thanks for staying with us till the end. If this story stirred something in you, maybe anger, maybe hope, then it did its job. Because stories like this aren't just fiction. They're mirrors. They reflect what's still broken and what still matters. At Mr. Mac's Stories, we believe that justice doesn't always come with noise. Sometimes it walks in quietly through truth, resilience, and memory. If this story moved you, please like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to Mr. Mac's Stories for more powerful tales that speak truth to power. Your support gives our team the fuel to keep digging deeper, to keep telling stories that others might ignore. Because around here, Mr. Mac's Stories isn't just a name. It's a voice for those who were never heard. Until next time, stay brave, stay kind, and never stop listening.